Hello everyone, welcome. This is Matt. It's yeah, we met like I think a little bit during Corona,
hmm
and yeah, it's very. I've seen some of your videos also about your method to learn Japanese. These are the most things which I know about your channel. And yeah, in this video, I want to introduce you to my audience. I want to interview you, so I have some questions.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on. It's great to talk to you. I'm excited for this too. And yeah, so I guess my kind of short origin story is that I got really interested in Japanese when I was in high school, and I
Mhm.
spent a couple years kind of just doing normal language learning type of things, but not having great results. And then I found this website called All Japanese All the Time that suggested taking a really hardcore immersion approach. So I dove full straight into this immersion and spent about 5 years immersing myself in Japanese as close to full time as I could. And through
Mhm.
that, I reached a pretty high level, a similar level to where I'm at today. And after
Mhm.
that, I started making videos and helping people learn Japanese as well as other languages with these kind of this immersion based method.
I like it that you're focusing on one specific language. It's very interesting to my audience because, like, I've also had videos with people speaking multiple languages on different
Mm.
levels. I'm one of them. Like I speak languages on different levels. But I think your Japanese is at a very high level, like also better than my English, for instance. That's what I've noticed. But I think it's good to ask questions about that and yeah, to show my audience what's possible. All right. I also want to tell to my audience, like I have a language board game which I created by myself, and for me, I really like it to combine entertainment with language learning. So yeah, you guys can play my language board game with the chat when I'm streaming on my Twitch channel, and that's the first link below this video. Does it ever happen that you're watching a movie and later you're hearing a word, maybe like 24 hours later or 2 days later, and you think like, hey, I've heard that before, and that you realize like, hey, I'm learning more than I'm thinking while relaxing.
hmm Well, for me, that process definitely takes place, but it's hard to always pinpoint when I
Mm.
learned something because like you just mentioned, sometimes I might be watching a movie and for me, I'm just enjoying the story. I don't think of it as trying to learn something new, but part of my brain is learning new things and recognizing new patterns. But precisely because like you said, I and consciously I'm not learning. Later on, when the time comes where I'm having a conversation and someone says a word and I realize, oh, I know what that means, but I don't know how I know. Or sometimes I'm speaking and a word pops up in my mind and I say a word and I'm like, wait, was that right? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, oh, wow, I don't think I've ever said that before. Or like, I didn't even know that I knew that. So I do have these experiences of realizing I know things, but not knowing how I learned them. And so I think for me, it's a more mysterious process. I don't know if I learned that a month ago, 24 hours ago, last year, precisely because it's happening subconsciously, you could say.
Yeah, I think it's also maybe you've heard an expression before of you, or you've heard one word in another context, and by hearing it again in another context, after a while, it's yeah being saved in your brains. And yeah, I think I have a next question about that, which is like maybe something what I'm wondering because like you're really focusing a lot on Japanese. Like my next question would be like how long, because I think you've learned it for 5 years, right? How long
hmm
did it took you before you had a feeling that you were not translating from English to Japanese into your brain? So that it
Yeah, yeah.
basically, how do you say it? You were hearing something and immediately you know what to say
hmm
without translating it. Like how long approximately would is taking that process? What
Yeah,
would you say to my audience? Yeah.
that's a really good question, but I just realized there's another point that I should probably add to the previous question. Is it okay if
Mhm.
I
Sure.
that real
Yeah.
quick about the
Yeah.
relaxation? The way that I think of my own learning when I was
Yeah.
learning Japanese, and the way that I talk about it on my channel and my website, is that
Yeah.
you can most of the language learning process is kind of a leisurely type of process. You could do it while relaxing, but I think it's
Yeah.
also good to have some time where you go really intensive and you are consciously trying to look things up and study. But you can only do that for a limited amount of time each day because it's so exhausting. It uses up a lot of energy. So when I was learning Japanese, what I would do is I did make flashcards, and I
Mhm.
would do flashcards for like an hour every morning to learn new words. I used Anki, a spaced repetition system. And so, as most of my day was just spent reading books in Japanese, watching movies, it didn't
Yeah.
really feel like studying. But when I came across a word that I wanted to learn, I would just write it down or I would copy and paste it onto a text document. And then at a different point in time, I would turn those into flashcards and do the flashcards. So I had a small, maybe 1 to 2 hour period of like real learning or study, and then many, many, many hours of kind of relaxation. And I think that the little bit of study allowed me to get more out of all of the hours of relaxation. Although the immersion hours are there's a lot of learning that takes place during that period as well, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah, but I what I recognize sometimes with German, I have like a similar thing with German. Sometimes I listen to meditation, like meditation, whatever stories, however you call it, like,
Yeah,
and
guided
you
meditation.
really hear specific words, but your brain is also like in a moment of relaxing, so it doesn't take energy at all, but still you hear other words than the words in daily life, within social conversation. So I also think the interesting part is definitely that when you're relaxing, that you're also absorbing words which could be different compared to the words which you hear when you're not relaxing and studying intensively. So I think this balance is very interesting, and it really helps that you are telling my audience and your audience about your approach. So I think that's a good thing. And yeah, you wanted to answer that question, right? About
Yeah, yeah. So now
translating.
I can talk about what you asked about
Yeah.
the
Yes.
translating in my head. I mean, I think it's not like a switch that happens overnight. I remember I was probably around 8 months into learning Japanese hardcore when I started noticing that it would happen sometimes where I would hear something and I would understand it,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't have to translate it into my head. But then there was still a lot of things where I would have to translate it. So it kind of the process started maybe around 8 months in, and it maybe after a year, I would say, I would translate in my head very little. And I remember a specific a moment where I noticed that I could think in pure thought. I call this mentalese, just like it's like Japanese, Chinese, like the pure language of your mind, the mentalese. And it wasn't that I was thinking in Japanese, but I wasn't thinking in English either. I just had this idea I wanted to express, and it wasn't in English. And that was really cool to realize because up until that point, thinking was synonymous with English. It was like the thought, the what I wanted to say and the words that I would say it were like meshed together, and I couldn't separate them. But after learning a foreign language for a certain period of time, they started to separate, and I started to realize, oh, I have this thought. It's not in English, but I also don't know how to put it into Japanese, but sometimes I would be able to put into Japanese. So what started to happen was that instead of translating from Japanese to English, I would translate from Japanese into pure just understanding or pure thought, and that would start to happen more and more. And after I'd say a year, probably it wasn't that I could understand everything automatically, but even if I had to think about it, English wasn't part of the process. It was just this internal process that was going a back and forth between Japanese and then pure thought. If that makes sense.
So basically, I sort of understand it also, like you could say what you want to say in Japanese in like as in English, but you would say it on a different way because Japanese is a totally different
Hmm.
language than English. So basically, um, well, is it like almost like a sort of split personality that you're thinking something in English, something in Japanese, but because of the culture is so different that you are also like having a sort of different closet where you're putting the Japanese information in and
Yeah,
the English words into your head, into your brains. It's something like that because yeah, I try to understand how your experience is. Like, is it something like that?
yeah, it is kind of
Okay.
like that, but I'd say that it happens on two different levels. One of them is kind of really just on the level of language and expressing ideas, and then there's a kind of broader like personality or cultural aspect. So just on the pure thought aspect, there are just things that Japanese people say that English speakers don't say. Like for example, I've used this example before. There's this word in Japanese called gyakugire, which is when
Yeah.
somebody who's in the wrong gets angry at the other person, even though really the other person should be angry at them. Like, let's
Yeah.
say you have like a yogurt in the fridge, and you tell me like, "Hey, this is my yogurt, so don't eat it." And then
Mhm.
I just ignore that and I go and eat it anyway. And then you come to me and you're like, "Hey, why'd you eat my yogurt? I told you not to." If I got mad at you and were like, "Well, you should have put it in the fridge if you didn't want me to eat it," something like that.
Yeah.
Really, I'm in the wrong. You should be mad at me, yet I'm getting mad at you. There's a word for that in Japanese called gyakugire, but there's no word in English for this precise phenomenon. And so sometimes when I'm speaking English, if I run into a situation where someone's doing that, then
Mhm.
I want to say, "Hey, don't gyakugire," or "You're doing gyakugire," but there's no English word for it. So sometimes I almost say something in Japanese, or I have a Japanese style thought, and it doesn't have to do with having a different personality necessarily or a different culture. It's just an idea that we could have in English, but we just happen to not have a word for that. So all the time I'll be talking to people and being like, "Oh crap, the thing I want to say, there's a perfect word in Japanese for this, but I don't have a word in English." And
Do you
so,
also
and
have videos on your channel about this like specific topic? Like, so for example, like what to do if you want to say something in Japanese, but you cannot really say it that way. Like, what are you? Which words are you using in order to say the same thing in English, more or less? Do you have like maybe
I mean,
videos?
I have a video called Language Isn't Math where I talk about this concept and like the
Language
way
isn't.
that language isn't math. Because
Oh,
if
okay.
language was math, it would be an equation, right? That you could calculate and get the answer. But languages are so different from one another, you
Yeah,
can't just it's not like an equation that you can solve and get the answer. So
because your name is
that
also Matt. I thought it was like a weird
oh,
joke.
I see.
Like, but
Language
yeah,
isn't me either, but yeah.
yeah,
Uh
that's
but yeah, so I mean what I try to do when I'm like, okay, I have this English thought, what would I say in Japanese? If I just ask myself, what would a Japanese person say in this situation? And
yeah,
sometimes by just changing the question that you ask yourself, your brain
yeah.
gives you a different answer. And so sometimes that will be a really good way for me to come up with a natural thing to say. But oftentimes you also just need to expose yourself to the language more because maybe you haven't come across the thing that a Japanese person would say in that situation yet. So you need to learn more in order to be able to do it.
Yeah, well,
But
I speak nonsense in any language, even my mother tongue, so I don't have like any. But I have a question about that. Like, I mean, you lived abroad in Japan, or
yeah.
like my next question would be like, do you think living abroad would help a lot if you would break that how do you say it? Like, if you would want to break the ice, like if you want to try to be into a community, do you think it would help if you would stay there, or do you think it would also be possible if you would try to read a book about the culture, the history? Like, how important is it to live there? Like, could you tell something
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
about
well,
that?
that's a really good question, and I think it depends on a couple things. First of all, it depends on your goals, and it also depends on where you're currently at in the language learning process. I think that if you're still a beginner or maybe like a low intermediate learner, then it won't necessarily be that beneficial to move to the country because if you don't have a basic level of ability, you won't be able to connect with the people in the country. Like when I was in Japan, I actually was still at a very low level, and I found that I couldn't really make friends with the Japanese people because my Japanese wasn't good enough and their English wasn't good enough. So there was just this language barrier that was really hard to cross. But I think if you're at a kind of high intermediate or low advanced level or above, then it can be really beneficial to go to the country because you'll be able to make friends and really connect with the culture directly. And that's going to allow you to learn probably faster than it would be possible to learn in your home country. Although, like in the case of my personal story, it is possible to reach a very high level without going to the country just by using the internet. You know, you can uh, go on the internet in your target language, make friends with native speakers over the internet, or
Yeah.
maybe you can find locals. But I also find that if you want to reach the highest possible level, like you really want to try to become a native speaker or become a professional author in that language, then it's really hard to do that without going into the country. And I still feel like there's places that I lack in my own Japanese ability that I would really need to be physically immersed in the culture in order to improve upon. Like the subtle dynamics of social interaction, you know, and the subtle way your body language, the way that you like nod your head while you listen, the way that you say like like even little things like that. You know, they make a big difference because natives if you do all those little subtle things right, it subconsciously makes a native speaker feel really comfortable. It makes you feel like you're one of them, you understand them. But it's hard to nail all those little small things without being in a physical environment where you're surrounded by people who do that, right? It's such a subtle thing. So I do feel like at the very highest levels you probably need to go to the country to really master it.
It's interesting. Like, I think it's also like if you want to go for the part where you are, you know, like that really native level area, then it I think it's a lot of you have to put a lot of effort in that, and I really
Hmm.
admire the fact that you're putting so much of your time into language learning. I think it's a cool thing to share to my audience. And like I think I have a next question, which is also like related to this topic. It would be something like, are you also reading? It's maybe a weird question, but are you also interested in boring articles or boring movies, things which are totally not into your yeah, what do you say, your field,
Hmm.
your your area of the things where you're normally interested in, like let's say I don't know what you like, you're already told it, math, for example. But is there like anything which you don't like and which you're still where you're still looking at in order to improve your level of the
Yeah,
language?
yeah. So yeah,
Okay.
that's a really good question, and I do that, especially like for example, for me, I wanted to understand Japanese pop culture because I noticed when native speakers had conversations, they would reference pop culture really regularly, right? Like maybe there'd be some movie where so many Japanese people have seen the movie that Japanese people just assume that you've seen it, right? Like for example, in English, you make a Fight Club reference because you assume that everyone has seen Fight Club, right? Or everyone's seen Toy Story, or there's some movies that are just they reach a certain status in the collective consciousness where people feel like they can just assume that you know it. So there's all these cultural artifacts, which include movies, TV shows, commercials. A lot of times people talk about famous old commercials and like celebrities, politicians, and things like this, where almost all Japanese people know them, and so they come up in conversation. And I felt like there were a lot of times where even though I understood the words they were saying, I couldn't really get a certain joke, or I missed out on a point that someone was making because I hadn't seen those references. So I went back and like watched a lot of old movies and TV shows and anime and things like this that really they weren't that interesting to me, but I did it because I wanted to be able to understand those references. And of course, there's still references that I miss, but I found that this is something where the 80-20 rule applies, where if you learn the most common 20% of references, like you watch the most popular 20% of movies and memorize the most popular 20% of celebrities, then you start getting the vast majority of the references that people do. So I did do that, and it was a little boring, but I also still enjoyed it just because for me, leveling up my Japanese was my passion. And so even though I was watching a boring anime, some part of me was still like, yeah, but this is going to level me up. And that made it gratifying in a way.
I get it. I get it. So because you're interested in Japanese, it went because basically the instrument, which is Japanese, a sort of instrument to whatever follow something or to whatever. Even when you would give a presentation about a topic which you don't like, it's still with the instrument Japanese, and that gives you the motivation to yeah, how do you say, to um, yeah, to explore in that language.
Hmm.
That's what I sort of hear. I think it's a good experience basically because like for example, like I really like to create art. That's something what I like, you know. But
Hmm.
I also like languages. So when I hear a language, even when it's about a topic which I maybe don't like, I still it's like sort of signals going to your brains like okay, that language, a language where I'm focusing on. And yeah, I think it's always interesting and it's always very cool to see yeah, like I've had projects with other people as well, video projects, and I always see a sort of lights in their eyes when they're talking about languages, you know, even when it's about a topic which they maybe don't like or so yeah, that's cool. And another thing which I also think is that if we are whatever we can learn, you know, it can help us, you know, even when it's something
Hmm.
we're not interested in. So for example, someone is studying something, I never heard about it. I'm a person who's like, yo, what is it? What does it mean? And then you get other ideas about it. And like even for my English, for example, when I talk about a topic which is like far away from what I like to do in my
Hmm.
daily life, and then it's helping me. So I think that you're always learning basically, and I
Yeah.
think it's a good thing, you know. And
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
yeah, I have another question, and it's like if you could have a time machine, so if you could whatever buy a spaceship and you could go 4 years ago, 5 years ago, like is this something what you would change? If it's yes, what would you change, or would you not change it, and would you like it that you are how do you say it, like that there are things which you've learned, like what do you want to say about that? So is there anything what you could
Yeah.
change, or you're like, yo, no, this is the adventure, I don't want to change it, it's life. It's a little bit like philosophy, but I think it's something where
Yeah.
yeah, where we could talk
I
about. And yeah.
definitely. Yeah, that's a really hard question. And I mean, there would definitely be a lot of things I changed about how I learned Japanese if I could just do that, because I made so many dumb mistakes that I learned through experience. But a lot of times people ask me like, if you could go back in time, would you still learn Japanese? Would you still dedicate this large portion of your life to learning Japanese? And it's really hard because, I mean, on one hand, when I first started learning Japanese, I had this idea that Japan was kind of this heaven on earth that was really exotic and really technologically advanced and really almost superior to the West. And that was a lot of my motivation. And then later on, I realized that a lot of that wasn't true. Japan's just a normal country. They have pros and cons, and in fact, there's a lot of things that are regressive about Japanese culture that I hopefully they continue to improve upon. Not that the West doesn't have their own huge host of issues as well. But so I did go through a couple different periods of disillusionment and disenchantment with Japanese culture, realizing that, oh, this isn't some heaven on earth. This is just kind of a normal country. And if it's a normal country, why am I dedicating so much of my life and working so hard for it? And it was hard to come up with answers to that question. And at this point in time, I've spent so much time with Japanese that it's become just a part of me. And so I don't need
Yeah.
it. That's the only answer that I need to it, is that it's already within me. It's already a part of me. And so I do it because that's what I am. But if I could go back to a point in time where it was not yet a part of me, would I still want to do it? It's hard to say. Sometimes I think it would be cool to have done Chinese because China is so relevant to the modern world right now, and now I'm very interested in Chinese as a language. So sometimes I think, oh man, I wonder what my life would have been like if I did Chinese instead. Or maybe sometimes I think, oh, what if instead of doing language learning, I dedicated myself to something totally different? Like, what if I became a programmer and then tried to make some app and make it really big or something like that? So there's so many different fantasies, and it's so hard to predict what those different pathways would have led to, that it's really hard to say, you know?
Hmm. Does it also feel like you said it's a sort of part of you, right?
Yeah.
Japanese. So it's a little bit like deep question maybe, but does it feel a little bit like a relationship, like a sort of girlfriend or something which is so important in your life that you cannot take distance of it? Like, could you tell something about that feeling?
Yeah,
Like,
no, I think you could compare it to a relationship like that, and
okay,
there's been lots of ups and downs, and there's periods where I'm not as connected to Japan, but then I always come back around and then go through another period where I do feel really connected to it, and I do think that it is my relationship has matured in a lot of ways, right? It took me a while to learn to accept all the flaws of Japan or the
hmm,
things that I personally don't like that much and still love Japan as a whole in spite of those things, almost the way that like a parent loves their child, even though they probably don't think that the child is without things to improve, and things like that, and so yeah, it's definitely evolved and matured a lot to at the point that it's at today, and I still think it's going to continue to evolve and continue to change as long as I keep interacting with it. So yeah, at this point, I'm in so deep that I don't think I will ever be able to fully get away from it, even if I decided I wanted to. And all my other friends that I have who have like me dedicated a really significant portion of their time to Japan, they're in a similar place where almost no one seems to be able to fully get away from it. Even if you go through a period when you're like, fuck Japan, I'm done with all this crap. I'm moving on. They always come back to it. It's like once it kind of sinks its roots into you at a certain point,
yeah, yeah.
you're never going to escape.
I need to edit that part of the video. It will be one beep, like, but doesn't matter, I'm
Oh,
joking.
sorry,
Like,
sorry. Okay, I
don't
won't cuss
worry,
anymore.
don't worry, man. Like, it's unique. Like, we're in such a good, it's an interesting conversation. Like, I'm not sure if you ever had this question. Forgive me for asking it, but if someone could offer you 50,000 euros, and to make it clear, I'm not offering it,
Yeah.
in exchange to lose all your knowledge in Japanese, would you accept it from that person? That's a deep.
No, that wouldn't be nearly enough. Because
Well, it shows your love. It shows your love for the language. It's
yeah,
good to
yeah.
realize that.
I
Did you
mean,
ever
I think it would take at least like we would have to be talking about multiple millions before I would really consider it.
did you ever think about this question? Like, I mean, or never? Is this the first time that someone asks you this? Like, or yeah, maybe
I think
I've
this
waited.
maybe this particular question. Some one time as a joke, one of my viewers was like, "Hey Matt, can I buy your Japanese ability from you?"
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
so I was, and I think that made me think. I'm like, how much would I have to sell it for? But I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not something that you can put. into a monetary value, right? Because it's so much of my life, it's so much of me. It would be like selling part of my soul in a way, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I understand it. Like, I would give the same question, like, I mean, yeah, like I would also, I would not, I think experiences, or that's also something where I talked about with other people, like discussed about this topic, like what is important in life, and in my case, money should be not, like how you said, like I don't care about a big car or whatever, stuff like that. I care about experiences, friendships, things which you're learning during life. And that I'm very happy to, well, of course you're free to give any answer, but I'm happy to hear this answer, because I think it's very inspiring to people to see that like how do you say it, but we're not focusing on getting a big car or whatever, we just want to learn things. It helps you to travel. It helps you to, there are things which you cannot express in money, and this is a great timing for the next question. And it's like, which advantages would you describe, would you have if you speak Japanese at such a high level? And I can maybe even confirm that I never met someone in my video which spoke Japanese at such a high level. Well, you didn't speak it in this video, but I've heard it from your other videos.
Hmm.
So I just want to hear, what are these, let's say, 3 or 4 advantages which you could mention? What
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me personally, it's like being able to sit down and read a Japanese book and enjoy that Japanese book and appreciate the beauty of the Japanese language in a way that never would be possible through translation. Like a lot of times I'll just read a Japanese sentence and be like, wow, that's a really beautiful sentence. You couldn't express that particular combination of thoughts and or emotions through any other language. I don't think. And so for me, the value I get the most out of it is something that's completely internal to me, it's something like that. But there's also, of course, more practical benefits, like the other day actually saw, I don't know when this video is going to come out or when this other video is going to come out, but the other day I got my haircut by a Japanese hairdresser, and I was filming. I'm going to turn it into a video where it's kind of like, oh, at first I pretend that I don't speak Japanese, and then I switch to Japanese and surprise him. But once I switched to Japanese, we were able to like really connect and have a really high quality conversation about cultural differences, what it's like living
yeah,
abroad, because he's a Japanese guy who was living in New York, and what it's like being a hairdresser during the pandemic, and all these other things. And I could really feel that he opened up to me a lot more, and we had a much more high quality conversation because I was speaking his native language at the level that I'm able to speak it. And so that was like having little experiences like that all the time. That's another huge value. And also, I mean, this is kind of an obvious one. It's also kind of cheap, but like it's because I reached this level in Japanese that I'm able to be the type of content creator that I am, because my whole channel is about reaching high levels in a given language, that style of language learning. And through spending so much time with Japanese, I learned how to get at a really high level at a language, and this is a skill that I'm helping other people develop as well. So it kind of turned into my whole career.
yeah,
Gave me a career where I can be my own boss, essentially work when I want to work, do the projects that excite me, and not have to be doing something that I don't really want to do. So of course I'm super thankful that it provided me with that as well.
yeah. Again, thanks for being in this video, because I think it's cool. I think you also know that I'm focusing a lot on these multilingual prank videos, entertainment, and using language as more as a tool. I just want to have fun, but it's really interesting to have someone on my channel, talking about language learning on such a detailed way, like on a native level, because I think there must be a group in my audience being interested in that, and to hear your stories, So I think it's really cool, and I just hope that you're okay. That this video will be between 2 of these language prank clown videos from me, But I think
No, yeah,
the contrast is
yeah.
cool,
I
So
mean,
I think,
there's so many different ways to do language learning. I think
yeah,
it's totally valid to want to study many different languages and get a taste of all the different how many different languages there are out there, and things like that, and have it be a kind of opportunity to talk to somebody who you wouldn't talk to otherwise. And then I also think it's really valid to go really deep on one. So that's why it's like uh, good for to have all these different channels out there, so that people can first of all see that get a sense of the landscape, what are the options, and then if they decide on one way or the other, there's people out there who can help them and share their experience doing that type of journey.
I have another question. Do you think that well, this totally I think don't think it's off topic, but these are things where I think about. Do you think that aliens exist on other planets, and if they also have a language in order to communicate, are they talking like based with, like are they using sounds or anything, or is there another way of communication? Like it's the same with whales below water. They also have like another way of communication. Like they're animals using different yeah, ways of communicating. Like, do you believe that there's a way of speaking a language which is maybe like totally different as what we are human creatures are having? Do you have like any ideas about that? Like is or is
Yeah,
it
yeah.
okay?
Definitely first time I've been asked that in an interview. But
So,
yeah, I mean,
all
I
right.
don't have a really strong opinion either way as to whether it's aliens or not, but I lean to the side that there probably is intelligent life out there somewhere when you just think about how big the universe is, right? Chances are we're not the only ones. That's what my guess is. And if there are other species, I'm sure that there's if they're sufficiently advanced, they probably communicate in some form or another. And I would guess chances are that the way they communicate is completely foreign to us, and it's probably doesn't use sound or even something that we can comprehend. I mean, when you think about like mycelia, like fungi in the ground, they communicate in a way that's also like even more foreign than the way that whales communicate, right? We can still kind of get it's like okay, whales have these frequencies they send out, and it's kind of like how we send out speech. But already on Earth, there's things that are living and that communicate in ways that are already beyond our comprehension. So I'm sure it's even further with aliens, where it's just completely incomprehensible to us. Maybe they have something like telepathy or something like that, where they can just communicate their thoughts directly somehow. I don't know. I mean, it would be very interesting to get to find out one day, obviously. But
Well, I don't think we're the most intelligent creatures. Like I think there are definitely ways of communication. Like I'm also interested in like other planets and stuff like that because it would be a coincidence if Earth is the only planet. Like I mean there are already so many planets, like around the sun, and there are many other stars. So I believe there are other planets as well. So probably also other life. And yeah, just because you talked about math, that I thought maybe you're also interested in these things because it also has to do with communication, and stuff like that. And some people told as a joke, like in a reaction, like if there will be ever aliens, are we able to save the planet and to talk to them, like something like that. So it is. But yeah, what I know about whales, for example, like they've like within thousands of kilometers they can communicate to each other. That when I hear that I was like, yo, it's crazy. I mean, if we could do that, it's basically we have a mobile device or something, or a
yeah,
computer in order to communicate, and they don't need all these things. So I mean, some people said like, yo, human beings are more intelligent than whales or whatever, but on the other hand, they don't need these tools and they can already communicate with each other, stuff like that. So it's also about languages, in my opinion, this topic, even when we're talking talking about
yeah,
whales. But
yeah.
yeah,
Well, it's hard. I mean, there's so many different types of intelligence that, I mean, obviously, I think humans are intelligent in a way that whales aren't, but whales might have some other type of intelligence that we can't comprehend, you know?
yeah,
But I also think that just because whales can communicate across huge distances without technology, that's not necessarily a sign of intelligence. Just like how a bear is way physically stronger than a human, but that doesn't mean that it's smarter, right? It just means that it's born with some innate power. But I think that kind of power or ability doesn't necessarily equate to intelligence. And I think that's kind of what the most one of the most human aspects of being human is that when we're born, our base stats are really low, right? Like we're born like helpless, we're weak, we're really reliant on very specific things in our environment, but we have this ability to kind of create tools and to change our
mm,
environment. And that one ability ends up being more powerful than all the innate abilities that every other animal has, right? Like now we can communicate even farther than whales can, right? We can communicate with
mm,
people in space because we invented
yeah.
technology to do that. So that's kind of the like core of being human is being able to upgrade ourselves essentially using tools.
Well, these are things where I think about it. Like I recently make a video with the sort of like language chip prank. It was of downloading languages via head chip prank, something like that. And if people believe that I had a chip on my head, like I made something here from plastic. I put a cable into it, into this, and I connected to my phone. And I believe that I was downloading languages. And that I believed it was a little bit. I was a bit concerned because people believe that these things that these things could
Hmm.
happen, and they are already in
Yeah.
development. So I'm not sure if I can ask a question about this, but are you sometimes afraid that a chip will be developed and that we are learning languages and wasting our time, and that it doesn't make sense anymore? Did you ever thought about that, or is
I
this maybe
mean, it's
a personal
possible,
question?
right? It's possible that
Yeah.
that could get invented, but right now that chip doesn't exist. So I don't think you can say we're wasting our time, right? If the chip
Yeah.
like existed right now and you can be like, "Hey, do you want to learn Spanish in 3 seconds or 3 years? You choose or something." And you choose to do it in 3 years, then yeah, you could say you're wasting your time, but right now it doesn't exist yet. So maybe like let's say that 10 years from now a chip gets invented that makes it obsolete. It's like, well, do you want to be able to speak Japanese like next year or in 10 years? If Because if you want to speak it next year, you can't wait for the chip. You got to do it now. If you're willing to wait 10 years or maybe forever, because we don't know if the chip's going to come or not, then then yeah, you can wait, but like it's totally hypothetical, right? We don't know if it's going to be here or not. So I think you can't really take that into account when talking about language learning right now. But it's very possible that that chip will come about and language learning will basically become irrelevant, except for like a very small percentage of like super nerdy people who want to do it just because they want to experience what it was like back then. Just like how now there's people who like just for fun they try to live with no technology for periods of time because that's just what they're passionate about.
Would you be
But
one of the small percentage?
um, probably not, to be honest, because I think if we had that level of technology, imagine
Yeah.
all the other things about our world that would change. Like, oh, like, it would probably if we could see the world that those people live in, it would not even be comprehensible to us, right? It'd be like people from 200 years ago looking at the technology that we have today and it would be like, what the heck is this alien technology? So I'm sure there's going to be totally new, exciting things that people are doing that we can't even think of now, and I'd probably be doing those new, cool, exciting things.
But don't you think that a part of our humanity is like, yeah, how do you say it? Like that sort of human part, like emotions? Do you think that could be, yeah, how do you say it? Like, are they still available when people would have, uh, yeah, sort of level of technology in the future? Like I'm
I
just,
mean, yeah, it is really hard to say because, yeah, of course, within us, language is connected to our emotional system, and that
yeah,
connection is born through experiences that we have. So it is interesting to think like, this, like, can we download a language and have it properly integrate into our emotional system in the same way? It's hard to say, but I mean, again, this technology is it would be so advanced that you really don't know, right? Like maybe there's a
sure.
way to, maybe it is possible. Maybe you can download it and then suddenly have like the most heartfelt conversation you've ever had with that new language if it somehow is able to really integrate with all the deepest parts of our brain. It's
Yeah.
really hard to say.
Well, what I saw in the reactions, it was basically more a social experiment, even more than a
Hmm.
prank. There were discussions. The people were worried. They were like, "Yo, why are you doing this, man?" Like it was pretty heavy. It was. I
Yeah,
was
but
like,
I
yeah,
mean that makes sense to me, but I think it's because people always react to the unknown with fear,
yeah,
right? And every time we've had an advance in technology, people have said, "Oh no, this is going to destroy humanity." Like if you read even from thousands of years ago, when the written language was first getting invented, a lot of people were saying, "Oh no, that's bad. Don't write things down. It's going to make your memory go to shit." And then, oh sorry, I cussed again. It's going to make your it's going to make your memory become really awful, and then you're
yeah,
going to become really dumb, and you're just and all these things. So like that's why Socrates never wrote anything down. He said, "Oh, just remember it. That's going to be better training for your brain." And the only reason why we have like writings from Socrates is because Plato wrote them down for him, and so there's many examples of this throughout history. So I'm sure when this technology comes about, a lot of people are going to say, "Oh no, this is unnatural. This is bad. This is going to destroy
mhm,
us." But then once you get used to it, then sometimes you realize, oh, maybe this, maybe it does have some problems, but overall, it could very well be a net positive to humanity, just like the internet
yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah. It's a pretty interesting conversation. But I definitely. I also want this. Yeah, my last question will be. Yeah, probably people. A lot of people ask you what's your language learning method. I think that's a little bit a standard question. I would say if people want to see that, they can check out your channel.
Mhm.
But I have a question more on top of that. Like, so you have a language learning method. I think. Are there like also moments when you're sort of like editing your method? So sometimes like
Oh yeah.
you're learning language and you need a lot of discipline for that. Probably also routine. You have to wake up at that time. What are you doing if you're like, no, this day will be different. I like to focus on another language, like let's say Chinese, or I want to do
Mhm.
something else. I have like another energy level. It's the same like one day you want to eat pizza, but you don't know after 1 week that you want pizza with bacon on it. You never know that. So how are you doing that when you have like an other feeling of okay, no, I want to focus on this. What are you doing then? So
Well, when I was learning Japanese, the way I dealt with that is I would find something new or found something that matched my mood in Japanese. So maybe like for one period of time, I'd go through a phase where I was reading a lot of manga, and then later I'd go through a phase where I'd read a lot of novels instead. Or sometimes I went through a phase where I would be like I had a phase where I consumed a lot of content related to Japanese board games like Go and chess and shogi because I got really into that for a period of time. And then another period of time I consumed a bunch of baseball related content because I wanted to understand how to talk about baseball in Japanese. So I would always be switching what I was doing, and I'd go through new phases or new like mini hobbies within Japanese, and that's what made it fun. So as long because when you actually look at Japan, millions of people, everyone is different. Like there's all sorts of different things you can do within Japanese. Japanese people are all totally different from one another. So you can find an unlimited number of different interesting pieces of content to consume, interesting things to do, all within the language. So that
Mhm.
was the way that I mainly handled it for Japanese. With Chinese, I've been like also since I'm at a lower level, it's it's harder to apply that same logic because I don't there's not that much that I understand. So I kind of came up with a combination of just relying on habits because habits are probably the best way to be able to consistently do something that isn't inherently super fun or super pleasurable, and
Mhm.
in combination with just finding ways to tweak the method so that it was as enjoyable as possible. Like for me, I found that watching Chinese content with Chinese subtitles was the most enjoyable because I understood the most that way because the audio would help me understand the text and the text helped me understand the audio. So I decided I'm just going to focus on that for a while until my comprehension gets better because when I try to just read or just listen, I don't understand enough and it's not as engaging. So yeah, kind of just a combination of those two things, as well as always looking for new content, right? Like if I'm watching a Chinese show and I get bored, I don't force myself to finish the show. I just go and look for a new show, and that can help me get excited about it.
Yeah, but everyone is the same as like on Netflix. You're watching a movie. It's like, no, I don't like it. You go for another movie. Like
Hmm.
it's something which is always like something what could happen. And I think we should not be how do you say it? We should be nice to ourselves. I think also that's like also
Yeah,
something which I
totally.
tell people sometimes. Like if you don't like something or if it's not working, it could also be like another reason or something. Is there anything else which you would like to say on top of this, or anything about your projects, your recent projects? Yeah, you can just tell about that. And
Yeah,
anything
yeah. Well,
else
so
tell to the
yeah.
audience, as a sort of advice, or just go ahead. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Thanks so much. I would say that I recently started this new project called Refold. You can find the website at refold.la, and it's kind of just taking all my advice on language learning and putting it
Yeah.
into a structured study plan so that people who want to take this style of learning, this immersion based, input based approach, can do it in a way where they know exactly what they need to do and they don't feel kind of lost in the chaos. So if you're learning a language and you're aiming to get really good and you're resonating with some of the stuff that I've said in this video, I'd highly recommend checking that out. And then I also have my YouTube channel, Matt vs Japan, where I make videos on many different language learning topics, but they all kind of share the common theme of being in line with my personal language learning philosophy.
Hmm.
So please check that out as well.
Yeah, I'll put it in the description. I'll do that. And yeah, I really want to say, yeah, thank you. I mean, it was very cool, very relaxed. It was a little bit like a little bit surprising where we're talking about so many different topics.
I was
I,
surprised
I
as well.
But thanks, man. Like I really appreciate your time, and I hope that I can join a project of you in the future. And just let me know, man. All right.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks, man.